I don't think the game's over.
Welcome into Triple Zeros. I'm your host, Josh Buckhalter. Jumping right into things, a Week 10 recap. I'm going to touch on a couple of topics. Make this one a real quick one. The Oakland Raiders, don't look now, man, but the Oakland Raiders are making a surprise playoff push. They are now 5-4 and one game behind the Kansas City Chiefs for the playoffs, for the division lead, actually, in the AFC West. It's quite surprising, and everybody laughed at John Gruden and Mike Mayock, really for the hiring of Mike Mayock, and then John Gruden looking like he was kind of out of touch last year. But, man, if they go and make the playoffs, there's going to be a lot of people not laughing, including here in Chicago, where the Bears are currently struggling, even though they did get a win. We'll talk about that in a moment. But they're making that pick look really good for the Raiders, while the Raiders are looking at a playoff berth. They're looking at a playoff berth and a premium first-round pick. Life is good for the soon-to-be Las Vegas Raiders. The Cincinnati Bengals still remain winless. They are 0-9 on the season, and with really no end in sight, you kind of have to wonder really what's going on there. They already made a benching of Andy Dalton. They won't be changing their head coach. Just hired Zach Taylor. It's just hard to believe that all the injuries to the offensive line, as numerous as they are really what's keeping that team from being successful in any rate. They got blown out 49-13 by the Cincinnati Bengals, and this would normally be the moment where I do my typical chant of Lamar for MVP. And you know what? I'll probably be back on it tomorrow. But tonight, after watching the Sunday night football game between the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks, ended up 27-24. The Seahawks on a last-minute field goal by Jason Myers. Seeing what Russ did to get his team back, it's kind of hard not to give it to him now. He only threw one touchdown, one pick, took 5 sacks. He completed 70% of his passes, 232 yards. He was scrambling, timely scramble, 6 rushes, 53 yards. We know how Russ runs now. He doesn't run to necessarily gain yards. He really runs to keep plays alive. But tonight he was getting first downs when they really needed him, and that was huge for them long term. Conversely, though, San Francisco 49ers kind of, it's funny because Jimmy Garoppolo actually threw a touchdown in the pick and took 5 sacks of his own, but he only completed 52% of his passes. What we saw tonight was the Seattle defense turn the game around its ear after they were trailing, and then put Garoppolo in a position to where he had to be the one who was going and trying to win the game. It was on his arm as opposed to them trying to run the ball and relying on that defense. And while the defense did get them back in it, a couple of takeaways, a ripped fumble right out of DK Metcalf's arms, a double fumble between Russell Wilson and his offensive lineman, it just wasn't enough. And Jimmy Garoppolo, he got lucky tonight. And I know there's a lot of luck involved in a lot of these playoff runs, and for every championship run, there's some luck involved in there. But what I saw from him was a lot of times when they needed to have it, he was putting the ball in very dangerous positions. And I'm going to make this reference. People are going to call me a hater for it, but that's fine. They really remind me of the 2018 Chicago Bears. Really good defense, really good pass rush. They've invested 4 first-round picks in that front four. I think 4 or 5, something along those lines. I know they got D4 too. Richard Sherman having a great year back there in the secondary. They have an okay offensive line. They are missing some players. Missing a lot of players. They've dealt with a ton of injuries. That hurt them tonight also, not having George Kittle and losing Emmanuel Sanders early in the game, their new number 1 receiver. But you still saw some of the placement be off. Now, there were some drops by the Niners receivers, but Garoppolo was putting the ball in some very precarious situations, oftentimes in the hands of Seattle defenders, and they just couldn't come down with it. So that's something to keep an eye on moving forward. I think a lot of the questions still remain. You can say that he didn't have the weapons with him, and maybe they would have come out with the win because, the Seahawks defenders just weren't catching the ball. But Garoppolo was not very careful with the football, and I put out a stat earlier in the night, in the Facebook group, talking to a friend, that the Niners were 32nd in pass attempts per game, but Jimmy Garoppolo was 11th in interceptions. That's not good. Like as that illustrates, they don't throw a lot, but he's still throwing a lot of interceptions compared to how many passes he's throwing overall. So that's not something that they want. And we saw that theory tested and almost come to fruition again. The 49ers, or if the Seattle Seahawks defenders can hold onto that ball even once on that one of those final few drives, that game is over. Garoppolo was putting it in their hands, and it happens. Again, as a person who's followed the Bears closely, I've seen that. I saw that from Mr. Trubisky. I still see it a lot of times where he has throws that are dead in the defender's hands, but they get dropped. And, as time goes on, nobody remembers those. But those are definitely moments where I'm sure coaches are looking at it like, hey, man, you can't put that ball there. You got to put it over here or whatever the case may be. But he put it in some very dangerous spots, and I think that's something that they'll have to keep an eye on when they start playing real teams in the playoffs and it gets a little bit tougher, as we saw tonight. The Cleveland Browns did stop their skid. They beat the Buffalo Bills, who were 6-2 now. The Browns moved to 3-5. It's been a rough season for Cleveland, but Baker Mayfield did what he had to do to get a touchdown with about a little bit over a minute left in the game. And then the Bills missed a kick to tie it. It's just a weird season. This is what happens when you have that hype in the preseason and you haven't earned it or you haven't won anything prior to that. Teams are going to you're going to have that target on your back, and teams are going to come after you. And I think the Browns are finding that out firsthand. Again, something I can relate to wholeheartedly here in Chicago, as much as it pains me to say it. When you do all that you do, especially with the talking now, the Bears at least have made it to the playoffs. The Browns kind of teased going to the playoffs last year, but they ultimately fell short. They're going to do so again this year, and a large part of that has been Baker Mayfield and his interceptions. That's an issue he's going to have to work on going forward, but it was good to see them get out a win. Also interesting is they added Kareem Hunt back to the mix. He had 4 carries for 30 yards and 7 catches for 44 yards. So they were trying to get him worked in. We'll see how much of a factor he is long term. Nick Chubb still had 20 catches for 116, but you do have to wonder, because Kareem Hunt is there and he's a very talented runner, how much that's going to eat into Chubb's workload. For the Browns, that can only be good. 2 stud running backs like that with the 2 receivers that they have, only good things can happen. Josh Allen did a lot of my bads after this game. And the biggest thing that you get from him, and this is not a hard thing to pick out when watching, but he's just a raw quarterback. He's a raw player at the position. The decision-making, the accuracy is still a little bit off. He has a howitzer for an arm, but he just makes some off decisions sometimes, and that just comes with young age. And he comes out of Wyoming, so it's not like he had a top of the line competition to go against. It wasn't horrible, but he's not coming out of the SEC or anything like that. So it's not surprising to see him have the struggles that he's having. It was surprising to see people kind of overlook them. I guess playing in Buffalo, you don't get the media coverage, so it is kind of easier to fly under the radar with some of those mistakes, some of those shortcomings that you don't get in the major markets. But it was good to hear him be contrite about it. I believe he's very well aware that he has to play better. And as a quarterback, even if it's not all on him, to see him taking the media is a good sign, because that's where it's going to go ultimately. Once he is established in this league, that's where they're going to go. The media is going to go immediately anyway. They're not going to try to say, oh, well, your teammates dropped the ball. They're going to try to bait him into saying it, but they'll always ultimately come back to him. And it's good that he now recognized that early on and is able to compartmentalize it and know that he can grow from it. He's still a young quarterback, still a lot of season left to go. The Bills are still sitting pretty good with their record right now. It's competitive, but they're still doing pretty good. I don't think that he should in any way, shape, or form be worried about long-term or anything like that. I think that he's got a very bright future, but again, he's extremely raw. He's the number 1 wild card Buffalo is right now. I had to look it up, excuse me. The other game, Patrick Mahomes returned this week to take on the Tennessee Titans, who led by Ryan Tannehill got another victory. I don't know what to really say about the Titans. We'll get to the game in a second, but the Titans, I just want to say, they went out and changed quarterbacks from Mariota to Ryan Tannehill, and it hasn't been all good. Tannehill is kind of still a game manager, but he seems to be more willing to take shots down the field than Marcus Mariota was, and it's led to 3 wins and 4 tries. I'm sorry, 3 wins and 5 tries. He started back in the Denver game. I'm trying to go back to make sure I have his first start, Tannehill's first start proper. Okay, yeah. So he started back in the Denver game. So they are 3-2 since he's been a starter. The offense has looked more like a threat. Clearly, if they scored 35 points against the Kansas City Chiefs, it's hard to pick. It's hard to pick out because before the move was happened, I would have told you that this was just a lateral change from Mariota to Tannehill. Nothing was going to be gained. Nothing really to be lost. They were both kind of just milquetoast players who dealt with a lot of injuries that kept them from being on the field consistently throughout their entire careers. But there seems to be a spark lit under this team by the switch to Tannehill. Maybe it's just the proof positive that no one is above being taken out for performance. So maybe that's got everybody stepping up. But the big story of the game, Derrick Henry had a big run in that game. But the big story was that the Chiefs kicker here, aside from Patrick Mahomes' return, Chiefs kicker Harrison Butker had his field goal blocked to end the game after a field goal attempt to tie blocked to end the game. That ended up getting the Titans a win. It's notable because last week Butker got the kick to win the game against the Vikings. So it's life comes at you fast, man. that's one of those things that's just like you kind of look at it like, you were flying high. He had the interview with 21st and Prime at the end of the game. He got the call from Prime Time, and then they have a block, and he's not really the GOAT because it was blocked, but damn. That's rough. that's rough sailing, man. In other news, the Saints took out the the Falcons took out the marching New Orleans Saints, down in them in a big upset, a surprising game, 26-9, where the Falcons pretty much dominated the line of scrimmage and just punched the Saints in the mouth, and they couldn't really recover. And that was the game plan. You heard it mentioned during the broadcast that Dan Quinn made it a point that they wanted to get out and get ahead of the Saints and make them kind of play one-dimensional. They sacked Drew Brees 6 times. The Saints didn't score a touchdown, and they snapped a 6-game winning streak. That's huge for this team, the Falcons, who I've been ragging on for weeks now, if you follow, talking about how much of a disappointment this team has been since losing the Super Bowl. But to see them get this one and to do it while losing another player, this time on offense, Devontae Freeman, who's expected to miss some time with a foot injury. Brian Hill stepped up 61 yards on 20 catches. Not very great, but he was grinding out plays, and that's what's more important. He ended up being the only healthy back when it was all said and done. Kenjon Barnes is still there, but he's kind of a satellite kick return, just sparingly used guy. We'll see if he gets more tick going forward with Freeman set to miss time. But it was just good to see the Falcons get off the schneid and kind of get back some of the mojo that we thought we'd see from them this season, some of the competitiveness. It's been a rough go. Like I said, I've been talking about them for weeks now. The Saints, though, Alvin Kamara got bottled up in this one. 4 rushes, 24 yards. He had 8 catches for 50 yards, which is still good for him, but there weren't many splash plays from Kamara this game. You didn't really see him able to get loose. Again, a lot of that had to do with Atlanta coming from behind or playing with the lead most of the game and getting to Drew Brees for 6 sacks. A team that hadn't been able to get to the quarterback much at all this in recent memory, to be honest with you, was able to get to Brees multiple times. And Vic Beasley had 1.5. Grady Jarrett had 2.5. But that Vic Beasley one stands out because if you remember correctly, he was candidate to be traded before the deadline, and a guy that I had actually advocated for being moved to the Baltimore Ravens to help out Lamar in his MVP bid. But it never happened, and apparently he didn't harbor any ill will, and good on him because he went out there and balled out for the Falcons and helped them get a win. The Saints are still going to do fine. They're still marching their way to the playoffs, and they probably needed a little humbling. That's how it goes. If you don't, sometimes teams can get a little bit ahead of themselves, and this one will stop that. So good for the Falcons. Saints will bounce back, but it was interesting to see. And, division games are always weird too, so you don't really want to put too much stock in it in that regard either. It is what it is. It was a good week for the Falcons, a bad week for the Saints, but both teams will probably move on and just try to keep going with the rest of 2019. Real quick, the Jets beat the Giants 34-27 in the Leonard Williams homecoming that was spoiled by the Jets getting that W. Both teams are bad. It was really the battle for New Jersey, but another one, the Cardinals fell to the Buccaneers. James Winston threw some more picks, but the Bucs were able to overcome it this time. Kyler Murray and the Cardinals, they'll be good. I think that's going to be a really good team. He's got to figure out how to win and how to be effective an entire game. And of course, they need some more pieces on that team overall. So losing right now doesn't really hurt them in the long run. They need some more help for the defense, even though the defense is actually pretty good. That offensive line is terrible, though. And they could always stand to use more weapons. The running back situation is different, but with Cliff Kingsbury and how he likes to throw the ball, I'm not surprised that we don't see any workhorse usage from David Johnson in that backfield. Kenyon Drake was a nice addition. We'll see how they do going forward, but just a young team still learning how to win in the Cardinals. And the Buccaneers, that's tough, man. Jameis Winston's one of those players that I've always liked, but has just seemed to struggle to find his footing in the NFL. Has struggled to make the right decisions and keep the ball from going into the other team's hands because he likes to turn the ball over. Actually, joining Jimmy Garoppolo in the top 5 for turnover for interception rate, young Jameis Winston, but he does them in bunches. Jimmy Garoppolo kind of had a spread out. I know I'm bouncing back, but I just wanted to talk about that real quick because it was an interesting number. Well, as you saw the graphic earlier, Phins abandoned the tank. The Dolphins got another W, their second one in a row, beating the Indianapolis Colts 16-12. Brian Hoyer filled in for Jacoby Brissett in this game, and it really just did not go well for him. Hoyer has had a propensity in the past to throw turnovers, and when they happen in bunches, and that was the case in this game. He only completed 46% of his passes, a little over 200 yards, 3 picks, 1 sack. He did have a touchdown, but 3 picks. It's hard to overcome that at all, especially when the other guy in Ryan Fitzpatrick, who also has a propensity to throw multiple touchdowns at a time or multiple interceptions at a time, only threw 1 himself. The Dolphins, man, they're rolling. They're rolling. I guess fans probably want them to have some wins for morale. I'm sure the players want to win. Organization, it's weird because they went out of their way to become a not a good football team. So it's interesting to see them opt for the W's now. But when they have as many picks as they have, they only have to. This is relayed to me by Dolphins fans because I wasn't looking at it this way. I was completely like, why would you even want to try to do it now after going through all you've gone through? But the fan said that, as a fan, he wants to see them win. And with so many picks, they don't have to necessarily have the number 1 pick. They can always move up if they want to, or they can just have the capital and kind of let the chips fall where they may, which has proven to be a successful strategy for many teams lately. The Colts, though, they desperately need Jacoby Brissett back. Brian Hoyer is a guy who I've liked, but he's a backup. He's a backup, and he showed you why. Those 3 picks are just costly, and the Colts are quickly losing ground in the AFC South after having such a hard start. There was a team that I was talking about positively for the past few weeks. They've now lost 2 in a row and are quickly losing ground to the Titans of all teams. So they'll have to watch out, and hopefully they'll get Brissett back from that knee injury pretty soon. Another real quick hitter, Minkah Fitzpatrick. Since he's come to the Steelers, they have won 5 straight games, and he has been a large part of it. And I'm trying to pull up the graphic right now, but I'm having a hard time finding the exact one that I was going to reference here. Speaking of how he handled, how he's been since joining the team, I'm going to keep scrolling because I have to read these numbers off to you because it was quite interesting to see a player of his caliber. First of all, when he got moved, the Steelers got him for a song compared to what he's been giving him as of late. So that's one thing. But on top of that, the fact that they're winning these games with a lot of defense, some old school running, and then a lot of gimmickry. Gimmickry, is that a word? A lot of gimmick. I'm not sure where I'm trying to go, but a lot of razzle dazzle to the eye is impressive to me because it's, the Steelers for the longest time with Ben Roethlisberger at the helm have been a team that's been able to just go ahead and line them up and execute an offense and beat you that way with a talent. Antonio Brown outside and Le'Veon Bell in the backfield. Without Ben Roethlisberger, you got James Conner, who's been banged up, who's missing games. You're starting to see that they clearly weren't going to be. Antonio Brown obviously having the issues that he's having. They clearly aren't able to operate in the same fashion. So it's good to see them be able to adapt and survive. And I am really struggling to find this graphic right now. I don't know what I did with it. This is quite upsetting. But more importantly for the team, it's more personally, I like to see this from Mike Tomlin. He's a coach that catches a lot of grief for the things that were going on with his team, all the issues. Some people have kind of softened on those stances because they've seen how Antonio Brown has comported himself in other stops since leaving the team. But I do think that it was interesting to see that that they're doing it this way. And Fitzpatrick's stats since joining the Steelers in 7 games, 5 picks, 2 touchdowns, 1 forced fumble, and 1 fumble recovery. He's balling. And single-handedly damn near running that last game. So the Steelers at 5-2 are threatening to make a playoff run. I think they're similar to the 49ers in that if a team can jump out in front of them and put the ball in Mason Rudolph, put the game on Mason Rudolph's right arm, then things might go awry. But if they can get by on defense and playing close to the vest and a little bit of, like I said, a little bit of razzle-dazzle, a little shake and bake, then maybe things can work out for them ultimately. We're going to wrap it up, the NFL portion with the Bears. Bears got a W against the Detroit Lions 20-13. Should have been 21-13. Eddie Pinheiro missed a field goal. The Lions were without Matt Stafford, who was a late scratch. Jeff Driscoll ended up getting the start, I believe like a 6 or 7 start for the season. And the Bears got a win, and I wrote for Last Word on Pro Football. If anything, I asked the question, which you never do. Never supposed to ask a question, but I did pose the question. They got the W, but did anything really change? They had an outburst, 2 scoring drives in the end of the first half and at the beginning of the second half. Beginning of the second half that constituted 2 of those 3 scores. And then they had another one, a couple of drives after that one to open the third. But then other than that, it was a lot of punting, a lot of looking inept as we've seen much of this year. But we did see some better throws from Mitchell Trubisky. We saw this game was more on the receivers dropping passes, a problem that I wrote last week has been plaguing him for much of the year. Especially compared to last year when they didn't drop anything. This year they're dropping a lot more. But we also got a glimpse of him, Trubisky, having those moments where he kind of just stands there and freezes and doesn't do anything. And I had to say and point out that despite him having a good game, we've now seen this twice this year, especially where he's had good games against poor secondaries. And then when you think about his history against the Lions, it's his 5th highest total against any team that he's played his career. And the other ones were all one-off games. This is 4 games where he just averages good, has good yardage totals against the Lions, highest yards per air yards per attempt, or among his highest in his career. Again, this is over 4 games, so this is something that he does against the Detroit Lions in that secondary that's typically suspect, but was again on the field probably more than they would have liked to without Matthew Stafford. And what really bothered me was that the defense now missing Danny Trevathan, who went out with an elbow injury of his own, similar to Akeem Hicks, and just in the way that they were both bent back. They let Jeff Driscoll come out there. This is before Trevathan went down, by the way. Let him go out there and march 60-plus yards and 14 plays to open the game. Now, it ended up in the field goal, but that can't happen to a backup quarterback. And then they let him march again a couple drives later to get another field goal. Now, with Stafford back there, those very well could have been touchdowns. They weren't, but they very well could have been. And that's just something that we've seen. And you'll have to read the article to get the exact numbers on how they've changed since Hicks went down with that injury. But Mac's numbers have been down since then. You've seen the defense give up yardage totals higher, and it's been rough since Hicks went down in that since that Raiders game. That's kind of the dividing line. It's not factored into either one of the sets that I use for averages, but it's the dividing line because that's the game that he went down in, obviously. And with the W, the Bears do keep themselves alive, but they couldn't get one last weekend when everybody else in the NFC North lost, and they could have actually made up some ground. Instead, they wait till the Packers end up taking down the Panthers and the Vikings take down the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football. So they don't really make up any ground on anybody that makes a difference this week. But if they get a victory against the Rams, then they're back at 500 and it's a whole new ball game because people will start talking like maybe they can go on a run similar to how they did last year. Again, they're still in play to reach the record that I had them pegged for, which was 10-6. If they get it, I won't pat myself on the back. I'll be kind of surprised. I'll be very surprised. I'm going to be honest with you, but I wouldn't rule it out because we know that anything's possible. The NFL is definitely a week-to-week league, and with how we've seen them kind of figure it out, right? They've been so bad. It's been so many bad things. Like even the games that they've been bad, it's had to be confluence of everything for them to end up ultimately losing the game. It's never really been just one thing that's done it. It's been a multitude of things. So maybe going forward, they get one less of those things to happen per game, then they pull out some of these closer wins or some of these wins that just look like they should be going different ways. But one thing that I do want to say is, Matt Nagy, please stick with the run. And as we saw tonight, implement some more play action like the 49ers do, because it gets guys wide open and makes reads a lot easier for the quarterback. I really think that Jimmy Garoppolo is highly paid Mitchell Trubisky, but we're not ready to have that conversation yet. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick TO, and when I come back, I'm going to we're not going to take a team. We're going to power right through this because that's what we do. That's what I do here on Triple Zeros. I'm powering right through. We're going to switch to the NBA real quick, and I want to talk about the Phoenix Suns and their hot start. Devin Booker and the Phoenix Suns. First of all, if you know anything about the Phoenix Suns, you know that a lot of times they get flack for that organization being garbage. I questioned their pick of Cam Johnson in the draft this year. They passed up some big names. Kobe White, his teammate in college, even was like, what? The famous double tweet. Cam got picked and went to the Suns and went 11th, I believe it was overall. That was one that surprised a lot of people for the reasons of he was just kind of a one-trick pony. And that was a high lottery pick. But the Suns are sitting at 6-3, and it's the beginning of the season, so basketball is weird. You kind of want to look at trends and how things are happening more than you want to look at the record. But when a team like the Suns has a record where they're sitting right behind the two LA teams and only in a matter of victories against the Clippers, you can't help but realize that they're kind of growing and coming along and very nicely for what they have going. I'm not sure where that ultimately leads them. Obviously, their leading scorer is Devin Booker, 25.8. And it's weird, they don't have DeAndre Ayton. He's dealing with a suspension right now. He's only played in one game, and they've done everything else without him. But the Kelly Oubre has been doing well this year, 17.2 points, averaging just under 50% complete, 50% completion. I'm still talking football. Shooting just under 50% from the field, and giving them 5 boards also. Is big with him coming back. But the biggest addition, I think, and one that is not being talked about a lot, it might be. I just don't watch a lot of Suns basketball or follow a lot of Suns media, rather, to know what their conversation is. But Ricky Rubio's addition clearly paying dividends for this team. Just keep giving them some guidance. He's only averaging 13 points, but he's giving you 6.8 boards and 8.6 assists. That's invaluable minutes or stats from your point guard position, and he's a smart player. He's not going to give you much offensively, but you got that in Devin Booker in droves, and then Cameron Johnson again had 14 points, averaging 14 points this year. I'm sorry, 6.9 points in 14 minutes this year. But he had a really good game, especially did Johnson this week against on Sunday, I believe it was, against the Brooklyn Nets when the Suns actually won 138-112. And that actually leads me to my next point. The Suns haven't started, and the point about the Suns I just wanted to make was that it's good now. Let's enjoy it for them, but let's pump the brakes on saying, "Oh my gosh, they're so vastly improved," because it's early and we know how things can change. Teams go on, get figured out a little bit. Defenses kind of pick up and they kind of start getting the feel for you, especially the second time around when teams play you. So it's good for them. I do hope they keep winning. They're a young team, and winning is always important for a young team. But I'm just not ready to. I'm a little bit slower to crown young teams as ready to take that next step. But I mentioned how they beat the Brooklyn Nets, and that brought me to the referendum on Kyrie Irving and the issue of him being a winner or not. Now, you all know he hasn't won a championship minus LeBron. That's fine. We're not going to discuss that right now. But the Boston Celtics were in first place before him. They fell to 4th last year, I believe it was, and now they're back in first without him, sitting at 8-1 and on top of the division, while the Brooklyn Nets, who were a playoff team, are sitting now at 4-5. Now, again, the argument I just gave you for the Suns is the same one I'm going to use here. It's early for both, but now the Boston one is not surprising at all. They did take a step back in talent overall for the team, but Brad Stevens is a coach in Brad Stevens' system is such that it operates much better without star players demanding the ball, demanding touches, where it can be nobody above another. Now, you do have high-profile players in Kemba Walker, obviously, Jason Tatum, and Jaylen Brown to a lesser extent, but that's not a team with a superstar on it. That's not a guy demanding touches. Now, it is interesting to see the Brooklyn Nets struggling as they are, as it were. But I'm not ready to say that it's Kyrie losing. I know it's probably too late to say that. We're too far in and be like, well, I don't know yet. We should know by now. And he's not an alpha. He's a 1B. The analogy I like to use in sports a lot of the times is because, the go-to is Batman and Robin. And when it's a player like Kyrie, I like to say that he's not Batman, but he's better than Robin. So he's a Nightwing. Familiar with Nightwing? Nightwing is, I forget which Robin, but he grows up and becomes his own guy. Has his own offshoot adventures and whatnot. But he's not quite Batman, but he's better than Robin. He's Nightwing. And that's what Kyrie, that's what Paul George is. These guys are great players, and when they don't have to be the man, they thrive at levels that make you think that, man, he could be the man, but they really can't. They just don't have that certain it factor that allows them to lead teams into tough situations and come out victorious. We've seen that play out for both of them, for Irving and Paul George. So it's nothing wrong with it. It's tough to judge. I know people are wanting to rush to judge. This team made the playoffs without Kyrie last year, and this, that, and the third, and it's different now. Every year is different, you know. I'm sure the Brooklyn Nets would like to have a better record right now. They can still improve and make the playoffs. We'll see how that goes down the stretch. But yeah, it definitely is interesting to note how they've gotten worse with Irving while the Celtics have gotten better. Though me myself personally, don't put too much stock in the Boston because they do better with lesser talent overall on the team. Wild story coming out of Miami. Dion Waiters OD'd on gummies. He was suspended by the team a handful of games, in an effort, clear an effort by them to get out ahead of the league for dropping that 25-game anti-drug policy on him. You know, the one that got. I made a joke. I had to clean this up too. I made a joke about John Collins on Twitter, joking about him staying off the weed. It wasn't that. It was for appetite booster, something to help him gain weight. Just wanted to be correct. Not a matter of saying that he didn't do it. It's a matter of me being correct on what it was about and just clearing that up. But Dion Waiters, ODing on gummies on the team playing. He had a seizure. That's got to be a scary moment. But I'm not sure what's going on where he's out here getting gummies and why he's taking them on the team playing and why he's taking so many of them. That's not what he does. You can't just be going out here taking drugs and not. If you don't do drugs, I don't, you know, I'm not sure how else to put that. It was just an interesting story because, I mean, dang, dude, you know, when I was like gummies. I'm like, what? Did he eat too many? Like, there's a video of the guy who ate a bunch of the sugar-free ones and he got sick because the sugar-free sugar substitute or whatever it is messes with your stomach enzymes. And I'm like, oh, he did that. They're like, no. And then I read it again. And I'm like, oh, if you see down here in the bottom, it had gummies in the little, you know, quotation. I'm like, oh, he was high. Dion got high and didn't know how to handle it. And, you know, that's a story you hear often. So I hope he gets better. But it's definitely one that's kind of funny to see when it comes across the timeline that Dion Waiters ODs on gummies. Brandon Ingram down in New Orleans, is he reaching his potential? He's had some very good games of late. He's averaging 25 points this year. He had 28, 26 at home, 25 away. I'm not sure if we can say he's reaching his potential yet, but he's okay. Here we go. I had to get to this page too. But I'm having a lot of issues navigating here. 25, 27, 40. This is his last few games. 25, 27, 40. He had a 7-point game against OKC, but he had 25, 27, 35, 25, 22. And the question is he reaching his potential? And I want to say yes, but I know what he can do when he's the primary scoring option. I want to see what he can do when Zion Williamson comes back, because he seems to have an issue thriving next to a dominant post type player. Now, Zion is not one that demands the ball, but he's one that you want to have the ball in his hands, a player that you want to have the ball in his hands. So it'll be interesting to see if Ingram can do something similar with less volume. Can he be even more efficient? But he's been on a scoring tear of late, and I think that's great because I'm a big Ingram fan. I just want to see him do well and just not continue to struggle to find a way in this league when I know he can play. It's just you got to find a way to play with other star players. Otherwise, you'll never win and you'll be Mr. in a loss. And we know how quickly those players fade away. And I was gonna wrap it up with this, talking about injuries, but we had AD shoulders. He's saying he's still having an injury. Kawhi's knee, which had the league talking about he was okay to rest, but then he wasn't okay to rest because Doc said he was healthy and all that, and ended up costing him 50 stacks, which 50 bands is nothing for NBA franchise, but whatever. We'll let them keep up appearances. Chris Middleton set to miss some weeks with an injury. Gordon Hayward broke his hand. He had surgery. He'll miss 6 to 8 weeks. De'Aaron Fox also had an injury. So I ended up just saying, you know what? Injuries, bro. Injuries. Just turn them off. Like, I'm so tired of people getting hurt. First of all, as a football fan, you know you're going to see some of your favorites get injured, and that's always rough. But in basketball, too, they're just coming down, and it's just bad. Boogie, my boy Boogie's on the shelf. It's rough. John Wall was out for this year already, and then you just lose players left and right. I did a fantasy basketball league with my brother, and I had Ben Simmons, Justice Winslow, D'Angelo Russell, who ended up playing ultimately, but it was game time, and a couple of other injuries, and it was like, damn, just turn them off. I'm tired of this, man. I need to be healthy. I need help. Turn the injuries off. Whoever's controlling the 2K sliders and the Madden sliders on life, please turn the injuries off. And then I'm going to wrap it up with this right here, man. The Bulls' master plan has a fatal flaw. The Chicago Bulls' master plan is to chase Giannis Antetokounmpo in the offseason. Shocker! When he becomes a free agent next year. Surprise! Not really, right? Duh. That's everybody's master plan. The Golden State Warriors have been linked to him since before it was even thought of. But there's a fatal flaw in the Bulls version. Now, I've long been a proponent of the Brooklyn Nets plan of attack, and to a lesser extent what the Kings have done with building a core and then using that core to attract a free agent like the Nets have done. The Bulls have a group that I think has some solid second and third level options for scoring. I don't think they have a star. I think they know that they don't have a star, and that's why they build it the way they have. The one piece is missing is a floor general, a leader, a closer, if you were, but a player who can take over a game if they need them to when they need them to. And I think that that's Giannis. I'm not the only one who said that's not a secret. But the fatal flaw in their plan is they're not winning. See, a key component to a big difference in what the Nets have done and what the Kings have done, and why I said the Kings to a lesser extent, is the Nets took it and married a personnel grouping with the philosophy and got it to generate a playoff berth. The Kings don't have the luxury of playing in the East, so we have to grant them that. And they did make a push to make the playoffs last year in the West, which maybe that puts them on the evil plane, but the Bulls have no excuse. They are in the East, and East that is up for grabs with a lot of these injuries that are going on, and they still are struggling to maintain any semblance of the optimism that I had for them in the preseason with how they were looking. They've looked nothing like themselves. I'm actually have an article coming out for Pippen Ain't Easy soon about the stock watch of players going up and down. One up, obviously, is Chandler Hudson with that injury to Otto Porter. And then one down, Lowry Markkanen. It's a conversation I think that we need to have a little bit more frequently, a little bit more readily in Chicago. Something's not right with Lowry. I don't know if it's the playing style or he's just like Otto was earlier, not in his groove yet, but he had that one outburst game, and since he's done not much, and he's still only averaging like 14 points per game. They're going to need more than that from him, from the finisher, who's supposed to be their second best or best player, depending on who you ask. But if they don't, they're going to be wallowing in the depths of the lottery again, probably picking number 7. Who knows? Maybe they get lucky and they get 5 this year. But it's just not looking right. And ultimately, I think they're on a collision course to repeat last year where Boylen gets fired unless they can snap out of it. They blew their opportunity for a fast start and now have to try to gain some traction. They take on the Knicks tomorrow, a revenge game of sorts. Bobby Porter dropped 28-11 on the last time. Maybe Wendell could stop that. The defense has gotten better the last 5 games, somewhat. Offense has gotten worse, though. Kobe's shooting numbers have taken a hit. That's their fatal flaw. You have to win. See, Giannis is not going to come to it just because there's players there. They have to show they're winning, and you're competing again with teams like the Golden State Warriors. You're going to have to do a lot of work to get them to pick you over those teams, and right now, I'm just not seeing it. It hurts to say, but that's their fatal flaw. If they don't start getting any victories out of this whatsoever, looking competitive, their defensive effort is horrible. Giannis by himself can't fix all their defensive woes, so if they're not going to defend, it's just going to be bad all around. That's something they're going to have to work on, and I think that they still have the time, but with the ineffectiveness that they've already had, the injury now to Otto Porter, who's probably their best on-ball defender, and then you got he's their best 3-and-D player for sure. And then you got the ineffectiveness again of Larry Markkinen. Wendell Carter can't stay out of foul trouble. Kobe White's shooting is bad. Zach plays too much hero ball, and you just see this team being the same thing as last year, and you see a similar fate. Boylan got that contract extension. Let's see if he gets to play it all the way out. Who knows? But that's the major flaw that I see so far in the Bulls' master plan for 2020. That's going to do it for this episode of Triple Zeros. Thank you for joining me. Please follow me on Twitter at Josh G. Buck. Facebook is at Jukes and Jumps. Hit the Gmail if you need to send me, for any reason, jukesandjumps@gmail.com. And then, of course, the website is jukesandjumps.wordpress.com. You can read me at Last Word on Pro Football and Pippin Ain't Easy. Until next time, do what you do. Be safe. Peace.